Let me regret loving you, Mafia boss Saeed then kissed the maid in front of his entire crew. Elena Rosario existed in the spaces between. She was a ghost in the Di Lorenzo penthouse, a 24-year-old woman who had perfected the art of invisibility. Her world was the scent of lemon oil and industrial disinfectant, the silent hum of the commercial-grade vacuum, the whisper of her soft-soled shoes on $3,000 a yard Italian marble. Brighton Heights sprawled below the penthouse windows, a glittering, indifferent beast of a city. Elena cleaned the glass until it vanished, leaving nothing between the men inside and the world they owned. She was live-in, which was a polite way of saying she was trapped, undocumented. Her life was confined to the service elevator, the staff quarters on the mezzanine, and the sprawling, opulent upper floors. The men who frequented the penthouse, men in sharp suits with heavy watches and heavier voices, never saw her. They would look past her, through her, their conversations about logistics and rivals and shipments never pausing. She was furniture, replaceable. She kept her head down, her dark hair pulled into a severe knot, and counted the heartbeats until she could disappear again. She'd been working for the family for almost 2 years. She understood the rhythms of the place. She knew Mr. Vinny, the capo, liked his espresso with a single twist of lemon rind. She knew the younger ones were loud and reckless. She knew to make herself scarce when the arguments started, the sound of heavy glass hitting a coaster like a gunshot in the quiet. But she did not know Luca De Lorenzo, the boss, the head of the family. He had been overseas for 6 months, handling a deal in Italy. The penthouse was tense without him, like a machine missing its primary gear. The men were edgier, the quiet more fragile. Elena was wiping down the granite bar in the main lounge, long after midnight when he returned. The private elevator chimed, a soft, expensive sound. The doors slid open. Elena froze, her cleaning rag poised over a smear of condensation. He was tall. That was the first thing she registered, taller than his men, with a stillness that seemed to suck the air from the room. He was in his mid-30s, wearing a black shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and dark trousers, no suit jacket. His black hair was slightly damp, as if from the city's coastal humidity. He didn't look at her. He moved past the bar, heading for his study. It was only when he passed under the focused light of a downbeam that she saw the dark, wet stain spreading across the side of his shirt, just above his hip. She watched him go. Her training, her survival instinct, screamed at her to go back to her room, lock the door, and forget what she saw. It was not her business. Seeing things was dangerous. But he was leaving a trail. Small, glistening droplets on the pale marble. Her obsession with cleanliness, the one thing that gave her control, warred with her fear, the mess. He was making a mess. She waited a full minute, her heart a cold stone in her chest. Then, grabbing her cleaning bucket with the disinfectant and fresh towels, she followed. The study door was ajar. She pushed it open with her foot, expecting a shout, a gun, an immediate dismissal. He was standing by his desk, pouring whiskey into a glass. His hand was steady, the bottle was heavy. He had discarded his shirt. He was bleeding freely from a jagged, ugly wound on his side. It wasn't a bullet hole. It looked like a slice, deep and vicious. The air was thick with the metallic smell of blood and the sharp tang of the alcohol. He saw her in the reflection of the window. He didn't turn, but his entire body tensed. "Get out!" His voice was low, rough gravel, not a shout, but an absolute command. Elena's eyes darted from the wound to the blood pooling on the Persian rug. She looked at the first aid kit, clearly visible on a low bookshelf. She said nothing. She walked past him, her gaze fixed on the floor. She set her bucket down. She dipped a clean white towel into the hot, soapy water, wrung it out, and knelt. She began cleaning the blood off the marble floor by the doorway. She could feel his eyes on her. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic scrape of her towel on the stone. "Did you hear me?" he asked. Elena flinched, a small, bird-like movement, but did not stop. She finished the floor, then stood. She walked to the bookshelf, retrieved the first aid kit, and brought it to the desk. She opened it. pulling out antiseptic wipes, butterfly bandages, and sterile gauze. He watched her, his expression unreadable, his body perfectly still. He was a predator watching an unknown creature. He was still holding the whiskey glass. She gestured, a small, impatient flick of her fingers, toward the leather chair. A muscle in his jaw jumped. He slowly sat down, wincing as the movement pulled at the wound. She approached him. She had seen worse. The man she had fled. He had left marks on her that she still covered with long sleeves. This was just blood. This was just a job. She picked up a fresh towel and the bottle of antiseptic. She didn't ask permission. She just pressed the towel firmly against the cut to stanch the bleeding. Luca inhaled sharply, a hiss of breath through his teeth, but he did not move. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. He smelled of whiskey, soap, and blood. She worked silently. Her movements were efficient, impersonal. She cleaned the wound, her touch firm but not unkind. He let her, this man, who ran the city's underworld, who was known for never letting anyone close, especially women, sat shirtless and bleeding while his maid patched him up. As she worked, her sleeve rode up her arm. Luca's gaze dropped. He saw them. Faded. Yellow-purple bruises circling her thin wrist, old but unmistakable. Marks left by fingers. His eyes lifted back to her face. She was focused on her task. Her brow furrowed in concentration. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't called Vinny. She hadn't asked what happened. She had just seen a mess and cleaned it. When she was finished, she had applied a tight, clean bandage. She gathered the bloody towels, disposed of the medical waste in a separate bag, and cleaned the desk surface. She did not meet his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rusty. She gestured to the kit. "You should have a doctor look at this tomorrow." She turned and walked out, taking the bucket and the bag of bloody towels with her. Luca de Lorenzo sat in the silence, his side throbbing. He looked at the clean bandage, then at the empty doorway. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. He had been intrigued. In the days that followed, Luca started to see her. It was as if she had been painted into the landscape. He saw her in the mornings, wiping down countertops before the sun was fully up. He saw her in the evenings, a silent shadow collecting glasses, and he noticed the things he had missed before. He saw the way she flinched when one of his men, Marco, laughed too loudly, a sudden booming sound that made her shoulders jump. She recovered instantly, but he saw it. He saw the deep, tired smudges under her eyes, a weariness that went beyond a lack of sleep, and he saw the bruises on her wrists again. When she reached to clear his coffee cup, she always wore long sleeves, but the cuff of her gray uniform shirt was loose. She tried to pull it down, a quick, furtive movement, but he had already seen. He found himself watching her, this quiet, fearful woman who had fearlessly stitched him up without a single question. The observation became an interruption one night, nearly a week later. Luca was walking back from the gym, a towel slung over his neck. It was late, past 1 a.m. He heard voices from the main kitchen, a male voice, low and slurring, and Elena's, barely a whisper. He paused in the hallway, shielded by the darkness. It was Marco, the one with the loud laugh. He was drunk, leaning against the stainless steel counter, blocking Elena's path to the service door. "Come on, chica," Marco was saying, his voice oily. "Just one drink. The boss is asleep. No one will know." He reached out, grabbing her arm, the same arm with the bruises. "Please, sir," Elena whispered, her head bowed. "I have to finish. Please let me go." She was not looking at him. She was staring at the floor, her body rigid. "I said, have a drink." Marco tugged her, pulling her off balance. "Stop being so cold. I see how you look at us." Luca moved. He did not announce himself. One moment the hallway was empty. The next he was standing in the kitchen doorway. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marco froze, his hand still on Elena's arm. His drunken smile evaporated, replaced by pale, sober fear. "Boss, I was just talking to her. Just getting some water." Luca's eyes were flat, cold. He did not look at Elena. His gaze was locked on the hand gripping her arm. He crossed the kitchen in 3 long, silent strides. He did not speak. He took Marco's wrist, not gently. Marco cried out, a sharp yelp, as Luca applied pressure. Luca twisted, a precise, practiced movement that brought the larger man to his knees. Then Luca hit him. It was not a fistfight. It was an execution of violence. He struck Marco twice in the face. The first blow was to the jaw, snapping his head back. The second, with the heel of his hand, was to the nose. The sound was wet, a sickening crack of cartilage. Marco collapsed onto the tile, clutching his face, blood pouring between his fingers. He made a high, keening sound. Luca stepped back. He hadn't broken a sweat. He looked down at the whimpering man, his expression one of pure, cold rage. 2 other men, Vinny and another soldier, had heard the noise and appeared in the doorway. They saw Marco on the floor and Luca standing over him, his hand bloodied. They saw Elena, pressed against the refrigerator, white as a sheet, shaking so hard she could barely stand. "Get him out of my house," Luca said, his voice dangerously quiet. Vinny nodded, his face grim. "Luca, what happened?" He glanced at Elena. "Over the maid?" Luca turned, walked to the sink, and began washing the blood from his knuckles. He scrubbed them raw. "He was sloppy," Luca said, brushing it off. "And he was loud." He dried his hands, threw the towel onto the counter, and walked out of the kitchen without a single glance at Elena. She stayed there, trembling, until Vinny and the other man had hauled Marco to his feet and dragged him out, leaving a smear of new blood on the floor. Elena stared at the mess, then her legs shaking. She went to get the bucket. She was cleaning Marco's blood from the grout lines when Luca returned. She flinched so violently she dropped the sponge. She backed away, her hands raised slightly, as if to ward off a blow. He stopped, standing several feet away. He said nothing. He was just watching her, his face impossible to read. He was holding a single porcelain mug. He placed it on the clean counter, a safe distance from her. "It's chamomile," he said. He turned and left. Elena stared at the mug. Steam rose from it in a fragrant, hesitant cloud. She slowly approached it, touching the porcelain. It was warm, a silent apology. She drank the tea, her confusion warring with a strange, aching gratitude. A silent conversation began between them. Elena did not know why he had defended her. She was terrified of him, of the casual brutality he possessed. But the tea, that had been something else. She began to repay him in the only way she knew. She noticed he drank his coffee black, but that he often winced at the bitterness. The next morning, she brewed his coffee using the expensive, private stock beans and added a single, tiny pinch of salt to the grounds before brewing, an old trick her grandmother had taught her to cut the acidity. He drank it, and she saw him pause, just for a second, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. She noticed he used the private gym every evening. She began leaving a stack of fresh, cold towels in the small refrigerator by the treadmill, exactly 10 minutes before he arrived. She did not speak to him. He did not speak to her, but the gestures stacked up, one by one. One evening, a violent thunderstorm rolled over Brighton Heights, cutting the power to the entire upper half of the city. The penthouse plunged into immediate, suffocating darkness. Seconds later, the emergency generators kicked in, but only the main hallways and stairwells were lit, bathed in the unsettling red glow of the backup lights. Elena was on the main floor, trying to get back to her quarters. The elevators were dead. She had to use the service stairwell. She pushed open the heavy fire door and nearly collided with a solid wall of a man. It was Luca. He was standing on the landing, staring out the narrow, rain-lashed window. "Sorry," she gasped, stumbling back. "It's fine," he said. He looked at her. The flickering red light cast sharp, demonic shadows across his face. "Stuck?" "Yes." She hovered by the door, unsure whether to go up or down. "The magnetic locks engage when the main power fails," he said, his voice flat. "We're locked in until the system resets." Elena's breath caught. Trapped. The one thing she feared. She leaned against the concrete wall, trying to control the sudden spike of panic. They stood in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the roar of the storm outside and the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of the emergency light rotating. "You're afraid," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I don't like small spaces," she admitted, her voice tight. "Why did you stay silent?" The question came out of the darkness, sudden and sharp. She looked at him, confused. "What?" "In my study. With the blood." He turned from the window to face her fully. "You weren't scared. I was terrified. But you were quiet. You didn't scream. You didn't ask questions." Elena looked down at her hands. "You needed help," she said simply. "Not noise. Not questions." She paused, then added, Noise is usually for show, before the real trouble starts." He watched her, his gaze intense. "What kind of trouble?" She shrugged, hugging herself. The stairwell was cold. "The kind I left." She hadn't meant to say it. The darkness, the isolation, it pulled the words from her. I fled a dangerous man. Back home." He liked to make noise. He liked everyone to know I was his. He liked to shout, to break things. Luca listened. He didn't offer sympathy. He didn't ask for details. He just absorbed the information, filing it away. The silence stretched again, but it felt different now, heavier. "I wanted to thank you," Elena said, the words rushing out before she could stop them. "For the other night, in the kitchen, with Marco." Luca took a step toward her. She tensed, her back pressing flat against the concrete. He stopped, seeing her fear. He lifted his hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He brushed his thumb, very gently, across her cheek. His skin was rough, calloused, but the touch was so light it was barely there. It sent an electric jolt straight through her. "Don't ever let them touch you again," he murmured. His voice was a low rasp, thick with something she couldn't name. Her breath hitched. His eyes dropped to her mouth. The air in the stairwell turned thick and hot. The space between them, which had been a gulf, was suddenly too small. He was so close. She could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap, the ozone from the storm. He leaned in. She felt herself leaning forward, drawn by an invisible string. Her heart was hammering, a painful, heavy beat against her ribs. This was wrong. This was dangerous. He was her boss. He was a killer. His lips were millimeters from hers. She could feel the warmth of his breath. Clang. The heavy fire door at the bottom of the stairs burst open, flooding the landing with the bright white beam of a flashlight. "Mr. De Lorenzo? Sir?" A security guard. "We're getting the backup generator online now. The locks are released." Elena sprang back, hitting the wall. She was breathing hard, her eyes wide. Luca hadn't moved as fast, but he had turned. His body shielded her from the guard's view. He was instantly cold again, his mask of indifference snapping back into place. "Fine," Luca said. He straightened his cuffs. He walked past the guard and down the stairs without a backward glance. Elena was left alone on the landing, her cheek burning where he had touched her, her lips tingling from the kiss that almost was. She was shaking, but this time, it was not from fear. The whisper started with the guard who had opened the stairwell door. It slithered through the penthouse, infecting the atmosphere, in the kitchen. The cooks fell silent when she entered, their eyes following her as she refilled the staff sugar dispensers. In the halls, the soldiers, the men in expensive suits, no longer looked through her. They saw her. Some looked at her with a new, speculative curiosity. Others, the older, more established men like Vinny, watched her with a hard, calculating appraisal. And some, the younger ones who envied Luca's power, looked at her with sharp, undisguised resentment. She was no longer the invisible maid. She was the one the boss had defended, the one he had been trapped in a stairwell with, the one he had almost kissed. She was, as the rumor simplified it, the maid Luca touched. Elena felt the shift like a drop in barometric pressure. The air was heavier, the silence charged. She did her work, her head down, her movements quick and efficient, but the invisibility she had relied on for survival was gone. She was exposed. The feeling of being watched intensified. It was no longer just the men inside. One afternoon, she was taking the compost to the service entrance bins, a task she had done 100 times. The alley was supposed to be secure. As she pushed the heavy steel door open, she saw him, Across the narrow street, a man in a dark gray suit leaned against a black sedan. He was not one of Luca's. Luca's men had a certain weight, a grounded presence. This man was leaner, sharper, like a wolf. He was not looking at his phone. He was not smoking. He was just watching the service door. Elena's blood froze. He looked right at her. His eyes were cold, assessing. She dropped the bin, the contents spilling over the concrete, and scrambled back inside, slamming the heavy door shut. She leaned against it, her heart hammering. She said nothing. Who would she tell? Telling someone would only confirm she was important enough to be watched. Luca, for his part, had retreated. He was colder, more distant than before the power outage. He seemed determined to erase the almost kiss, to rebuild the wall between them. He passed her in the lounge, his gaze sweeping over her as if she were a piece of furniture again. But his actions betrayed him. The change came not from him, but from Mrs. Bianchi, the severe, gray-haired head housekeeper who ran the staff with military precision. "Elena," she said, cornering her by the linen closets, "your duties are being reassigned, effective immediately. You will no longer service the main lounge or the private suites after 6 p.m. You will handle the morning preparations and laundry only." Elena just nodded, but she knew what it was. He was walling her off. He was keeping her away from his men, away from the late-night meetings, away from himself. He was protecting her, and in doing so, he was putting her in a cage. She began to notice the new janitor, too. He was a broad-shouldered man she had never seen before, who spent an unusual amount of time polishing the brass fittings in the service hallways. He was quiet, but his hands were wrong. They were not the hands of a cleaner. They were rough, with scarred knuckles, and he wore a watch that probably cost more than her entire life's savings. When she walked from her quarters to the laundry room, he would be there, wiping down a picture frame. When she went to the kitchen for her own meal, he would be in the hall, checking a light fixture. He was never looking at her, but he was always there. It was Luca's security. He hadn't told her. He had just assigned a shadow. The realization did not make her feel safe. It made her feel marked. A possession to be guarded, the paranoia, the whispers, the man in the alley, and the shadow in the hall. It all began to suffocate her. This was not safety. This was a different kind of danger. She had traded one predator for another, and this one owned the entire zoo. She was a problem, a distraction. She remembered the sound of Marco's nose breaking, the cold rage in Luca's eyes. She was the cause of that. She was a liability. She had to leave. She had a small amount of cash, just over $800, hidden in the lining of her suitcase. It was not enough to get far, but it was enough to disappear. She would go to Arizona, find her brother. She would find a new job, a new name. She waited until she knew he was in his study. Late on a Tuesday night, she did not bring her bag. She would come back for that. She just had to tell him. She knocked. Her knuckles barely made a sound on the heavy oak. "Enter." He was standing at the window, not at his desk, staring down at the lights of Brighton Heights. He turned, his face unreadable in the dim light. "What?" "Mr. De Lorenzo?" Her voice was a reedy whisper. She cleared her throat. "I'm here to give my notice. I am quitting." He just watched her. The silence in the room was absolute. "I will be leaving tonight." She forced herself to add. He didn't move for a long moment, then, slowly, he walked toward her. He stopped a few feet away. "No." The single word was flat, final. "You don't understand," she said, her panic rising. "I cannot stay here. I'm causing problems. The men, they look at me. And there was a man outside, at the service entrance. I'm not safe here. I am a problem for you. A problem for me." He said it slowly, tasting the words. "And you think leaving makes you safer?" He took another step. "You walk out that door. You are no longer my staff. You are a loose end. You are the maid who patched up my side, the maid who saw me break Marco's face, the maid who is being watched by my enemies." He was close now, looming over her. "You will not last 12 hours. Tears of frustration and fear stung her eyes. "So what? You will keep me a prisoner?" I will keep you alive. I don't want this, she cried, gesturing around the opulent room. I don't want your protection. I just want to be left alone. She tried to push past him, to get to the door. He moved so fast she didn't even see it. One moment she was moving, the next she was slammed back against the wall, the air driven from her lungs. His body was pressed against hers, caging her. He put one hand on the wall beside her head. Please, she gasped, her hands pushing against his chest. Let me go. He caught her wrist, not hard. It was not a blow. It was a capture. He held her wrist, his thumb pressing down on the frantic, fluttering pulse point. He pinned her hand gently against the wall, high above her head. His other hand came up to mirror it, caging her completely. His face was inches from hers. She could see the dark ring around his pupils, the faint scar on his left eyebrow. Is that what you think? He whispered, his voice a low, dangerous growl. That you're just a problem? His eyes dropped to her mouth. You don't get to leave. He leaned in, his breath fanning her skin. You don't get to leave just because I'm starting to care. The admission hung in the air, a confession that felt more dangerous than a threat. He stared at her mouth, and she stared at his. The world narrowed to the few inches between them. He kissed her. It started slow, a bare press of his lips against hers. A test. She let out a small, broken gasp, and the sound shattered his control. He kissed her fiercely. It was not the gentle, hesitant touch in the stairwell. This was a claiming. It was anger and desperation and possession, all tangled together. It was every bit of the tension that had been building since he first saw her holding that bloody towel. His mouth was hard, demanding, moving over hers as if he could devour her. Her back was pressed flat against the cold wood paneling. Her hands were trapped above her. She was completely at his mercy. And she kissed him back. A part of her, the part that had been invisible and terrified for so long, rose up and met his fire. It was a kiss of desperation, a confused, hopeless, and hungry response. He deepened it, his tongue tracing her lips, and she opened for him. He tasted like whiskey and control. His hands, still pinning her, were cautious, his grip firm but not bruising. He was holding himself back even as he was taking everything. It was too much. The heat, the intensity, the sheer fact of who he was. This was madness. He was a killer. He was her boss. This kiss meant something she was not ready for. She broke away, tearing her mouth from his, turning her head to the side. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, please." She was shaking, terrified of him, but even more terrified of herself. Luca stared at her, his chest heaving. His eyes were dark, almost black, his pupils blown wide. He looked at her trembling lips, at the fear in her eyes, slowly, deliberately. He let go of her wrists. He stepped back, putting a foot of space between them. He lifted his hands as if to show he was unarmed. He said nothing. His jaw was a hard line of granite. Elena didn't wait. She scrambled for the doorknob, her fingers fumbling with the brass. She ripped the door open and fled, running down the hall to the safety of her small room, her entire body shaking. Days passed in a suffocating, charged silence. Elena went about her new, truncated duties in a daze. She saw him only once, across the expanse of the lounge, and he looked at her with an expression so cold it froze her blood. He was angry. Angry that she had run, or angry that he had kissed her. She didn't know which was worse. The terror of her situation was a constant, icy knot in her stomach. The attempted hit came on a Friday. Elena was in the vast, sterile white laundry room on the mezzanine level, folding towels. It was one of the few places she felt relatively safe. She was alone. The door hissed open. It was Vinny, Luca's most trusted capo. He was not alone. The new janitor was with him, and the guard held a small electronic device in his hand. "Vinny," Elena said, her heart jumping. Vinny ignored her. He nodded to the guard. "Check it." "Check what?" Elena asked, backing away. The guard walked over to Elena's personal laundry cart, the one she used to transport linens. He began passing the device, a small black wand, over the cart. "New policy," Vinny said, his eyes hard. "We're sweeping for bugs. Deliveries, staff, everything." The wand was silent until the guard passed it under the main basket. It let out a high-pitched, insistent shriek. Elena clapped her hand to her mouth. The guard looked at Vinny, his face pale. Vinny pulled a stiletto from his pocket and jammed it into the seam of the cart's false bottom. He pried. The plastic paneling groaned and snapped, revealing the metal framework beneath. Taped to a crossbeam was a small, black square with a tiny antenna, a transmitter, a listening device. It was in her cart. The cart she took from the laundry, to the suites, to the lounge. The cart she left sitting in hallways. "They're using you," Vinny breathed, his face dark with rage. He carefully detached the bug, wrapping it in a handkerchief. "Stay here. Do not move. Do not talk to anyone." He and the guard stormed out. Elena sank onto a folding bench, the scent of bleach and detergent making her gag. They had used her. Someone had planted a bug on her. They were listening. How long had it been there? Had they heard her in the study with Luca? Had they heard the kiss? 10 minutes later, the shouting began. It came from the main floor, muffled by the concrete, but the rage was audible. She heard Vinny's voice, then others, then a roar. Luca's voice, lower than the others, but it cut through the noise like a blade, a crash, the sound of glass breaking. A man screamed. Elena crept to the service stairwell. She told herself to go back, to hide, but she had to know. She climbed the stairs, her legs weak, and pushed the door open just a crack. She could see into the main lounge. It was a nightmare. A man was tied to one of the heavy oak chairs. It was one of the younger associates, a man named Paolo, who sometimes managed the building deliveries. His face was a bloody ruin. Vinny stood near him. Luca was pacing, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt sleeves rolled up. "Who?" Luca demanded. "Mancini," Paolo gasped, spitting a bloody tooth onto the marble. It was the Mancinis. They offered 50,000 just to plant the bug. They're tracking her. They wanted to know what you were saying to her in private. Luca stopped pacing. He looked at the small black device Vinny was holding. He understood, in that instant, that it was not just a listening device. It was bait. They were tracking her. They were waiting for her to be alone, outside the penthouse. They were going to take her, and Paolo, one of his own men, had sold her out. "You put her in the crosshairs," Luca said. His voice was not loud. It was deadly soft, the quietest thing in the room. Elena watched, her blood running cold. Luca looked at Vinny. He gave a single, sharp nod. Vinny pulled his pistol from the back of his waistband. The movement was economical, practiced. Elena slammed her hand over her mouth to stop the scream. She didn't hear the shot. It was a muffled thump, but she saw the spray of red. She stumbled back, falling against the stairwell wall, her stomach heaving. She scrambled down the stairs, back to the laundry, and was sick in a utility sink. The violence, the cold, immediate execution. She was horrified, but beneath the horror was a purer, sharper emotion, terror. She was terrified. She was nearly killed. She had been targeted, used as bait, and a man had just died. All because the boss was starting to care. She could not sleep. Her small room was a cell. The walls were pressing in. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flash, the blood on the white marble. It was 3 a.m. She needed air. She needed to not be inside. She took the service stairs, her feet silent all the way to the top. She pushed open the heavy door to the rooftop. The wind was sharp, cold. It hit her immediately, whipping her thin pajamas against her legs. Brighton Heights was a sea of glittering, indifferent lights below. She walked to the high glass barrier, wrapping her arms around her waist, and paced. She tried to breathe, but the air felt too thin. The roof door opened again. She spun, a cry catching in her throat. It was Luca. He was still dressed as he had been hours ago. His white shirt was spattered with tiny, dark droplets of Paolo's blood. His face was a mask of exhaustion and controlled fury. He looked at her, standing near the edge, shaking in the wind. She didn't run. She was too tired, too scared, too empty to run. He walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the tiles. He stopped a few feet away. "You saw," he stated. It was not a question. She could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. He closed his eyes, a flicker of profound weariness crossing his features. He stepped forward, moving behind her. Elena tensed, bracing for She didn't know what, a push, a blow, an accusation. Instead, his arms came around her. He pulled her back against his chest, holding her tightly. His hold was not gentle. It was grounding, an anchor against the wind. He was solid and warm, and he smelled of soap and the faint, sharp tang of iron. He rested his chin on the top of her head. They stood like that for a full minute, watching the city. "I should have sent you away," he whispered. His voice was a rough, aching gravel, the sound stolen by the wind. "The moment I saw you in my study, I should have thrown you out." His words, his regret, broke the dam. Tears welled, hot and fast, streaming down her cold cheeks. He wasn't apologizing for the murder. He was apologizing for her being there, for her being in danger. She turned in his arms. He loosened his grip, allowing her to face him. She looked up. Her eyes flooded, the city lights splintering into 1,000 pieces behind her tears. "I don't want to run anymore," she whispered, the words fierce. She had run from her old life. She had run from the men in the penthouse. She had run from him in his study. She was done running. He looked down at her, his gaze searching her face, seeing the terror and the exhaustion, but also seeing the steel beneath it. He kissed her. This kiss was nothing like the one in the study. It was not anger. It was not possession. It was slow, tender. It was an ache, a confession of shared trauma. His lips moved over hers with a softness, a reverence that seemed impossible from the man who had just ordered an execution. His hand came up, his thumb brushing the tears from her cheek. She kissed him back, her small, cold hands rising to rest on his chest, on the blood-spattered shirt. She felt his heart, a strong, steady beat beneath her palm. It was a kiss of acceptance, a desperate agreement. He deepened it, a soft groan in the back of his throat. It was a kiss of profound, passionate vulnerability. He broke it only to rest his forehead against hers. They stood in the wind, breathing the same cold air. "Elena," he breathed. It was the first time she had ever heard him say her name. He slid one arm under her legs and the other around her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Elena wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the curve of his shoulder. She was not running. He carried her away from the edge, away from the cold, and back toward the door, which clicked shut behind them, sealing them inside. Elena woke with a gasp, disoriented. The light was wrong. It was not the thin, gray morning light of her own small room. It was soft, filtered sunlight, streaming into a vast space. She was in a bed, a massive, comfortable bed, swathed in sheets so soft they felt like water against her skin. She was fully clothed, still in the thin cotton pajamas she had worn to the roof. A heavy, dark gray comforter was pulled up to her chin. She turned her head. Luca was in an armchair in the corner of the room, near the window. He was exactly as he had been on the rooftop, still in the blood-spattered shirt. He was unshaven, and his face, in the clear morning light, was etched with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He was watching her. He had not slept. "You were cold," he said. His voice was rough, raw from the night air. He had carried her from the roof, through the penthouse, into his private suite. He had laid her on his bed, pulled the cover over her, and then he had sat in that chair. He had stayed beside her, a sentinel, just watching her sleep. The intimacy of the act was more shocking than a kiss. He had guarded her. Elena sat up, the comforter pooling in her lap. She looked at the blood on his shirt, then at his face. "You," she started, but she had no words. He stood, his joints stiff. He walked to his dresser, pulling open a drawer. "There is a private bathroom through that door," he said, his voice flat. "All business. A new toothbrush is in the vanity. Take what you need, then go back to your room. Do not speak to anyone about last night, about Paolo, about this." He pulled out a clean black shirt and tossed it onto the bed. He did not look at her as he began to unbutton his own. "Go, before the staff is up. Elena fled, her heart a confusion of terror and a strange, aching tenderness. The penthouse returned to its version of normal, but the axis had shifted. In public, Luca resumed his cold, untouchable persona. He was the boss. He took meetings in the lounge, his voice a low, commanding rumble as he issued orders. Elena, restored to her limited duties, would bring the coffee tray, her eyes fixed on the silver handles. "Leave it," he would command, not looking at her, and she would, setting it on the marble sideboard, never approaching the table of men. But then, just as she would reach the door, she would feel his gaze. She would pause, her hand on the exit, and look back. Across the long room, their eyes would meet. It lasted only a second, but in that second, the entire public performance dissolved. His gaze was not cold, it was possessive, heavy, and hot. It was the look from the rooftop, the look from the stairwell. It was a silent, dangerous acknowledgement. "I see you. You are mine." Then Vinny would clear his throat, and the connection would break. Luca would be the boss again, and she would be the maid, disappearing back into the hallway. The crew saw it. They saw the way the boss, who never noticed his staff, now tracked the maid's every movement. They saw the way he would pause, mid-sentence. If she entered the room, they had all heard the story of Marco. They all knew Paola was dead, executed within an hour of the listening device being found in her cart. Luca De Lorenzo, a man famously closed off to all personal attachments, was compromised. The resentment, which had been a whisper, now grew teeth. The epicenter of this resentment was a captain named Dante. Dante was old school, a man who believed in the separation of business and pleasure. He saw Luca's focus shift, and he saw it as a weakness, a fatal flaw that the Mancinis, their rivals, were already exploiting. "He's going to burn us all down for a pair of sad eyes," Dante muttered to two other soldiers one night in the billiards room. He racked the balls with a violent crack. "The girl is a distraction, and distractions, in our world, get removed." Elena felt the new animosity. The soldiers who had been curious were now openly hostile. They would stop talking when she drew near, their eyes following her with a coldness that chilled her more than the rooftop wind. She tried to make herself smaller, to recapture the invisibility she had lost. She scrubbed floors with her head bowed. She spoke only to Mrs. Bianchi, and she stayed in her room, counting the hours. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, tucked into a bundle of fresh linens. Mrs. Bianchi had placed it there, her face pinched with disapproval. "It came through a service vendor. This is not allowed, Elena." Elena recognized the messy, looping handwriting instantly. Her stomach twisted. It was from Miguel, her younger brother. She hid in her small bathroom to read it, her hands shaking. It was worse than she feared. He was not in Phoenix. He was in a border city in Arizona. He was sick. He had fallen in with a local crew, owing them money, $3,000. They had taken his papers. They were going to kill him if he didn't pay by the end of the month. "Please." "Lena," he wrote, "I am scared. These men are not like the ones from home. They are animals. I am so sick. You are the only one I have." Elena sank onto the cold tile floor, the letter crushed in her hand. Miguel, her hermano. He was all she had left of her old life. She had fled her past, promising to send for him when she was safe. And now he was in deeper, more violent trouble. $3,000. It might as well have been $3 million. She had 800. She had to go. She had to get to him. She would tell Luca she was quitting. This time, she would not let him stop her. She would take her money and a bus. She did not realize she was crying until the tears dripped onto the thin paper, smudging the ink. She was crying silently, her shoulders shaking, her head bowed in abject misery. The door to her room opened without a knock. Elena scrambled to her feet, hiding the letter behind her back. Luca stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the small space. He had never been to her quarters. It was a transgression, a violation of the unspoken boundary. He saw her tear-streaked face, her red-rimmed eyes. His own expression hardened. "Who?" he demanded. "Who touched you?" "No one," she whispered, turning away to wipe her face. "Please, leave. You're crying." He walked into the room, closing the door behind him. The small space was suddenly airless. "Tell me. It is not your concern. Elena," he said her name, and it was a command. He held out his hand. "The letter." "No. It is private. It is my family." He did not raise his voice. He simply held his hand out, his gaze unwavering. "If it makes you cry, it is my concern. Give it to me." She was trapped, defeated. She handed him the crumpled, tear-stained paper. He smoothed it out, his dark eyes scanning the Spanish words. He was fluent. He read every line. A muscle in his jaw jumped. When he was finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back to her. "I have to go," she said, her voice desperate. "I have to get to him. You cannot stop me this time. Luca? You are not going anywhere. He will die. They will kill him. Do you understand?" she cried, her terror finally erupting. "I have $800. I can take a bus." "And then what?" he interrupted, his voice cutting through her panic. "You arrive, a woman alone, with $800, looking for a brother who owes $3,000 to a border crew. What do you think happens to you, Elena? They will take your money, they will take you, and your brother will still die." "So you will let him die?" she sobbed. "I will handle it." He pulled out his phone. He dialed. "Vinny," he said, "I need a wire, 4,000, to a man in Arizona, and I need a contact in the Yuma sector. Someone who can pull a kid out of a bad situation quietly." He listened. "I don't care what it costs. Just get it done." He hung up. He looked at her. "It is done," he said. "The money will be there in an hour. My man will have your brother safe by morning." Elena stared at him, unable to process the speed, the casual, terrifying efficiency. He had just saved her brother's life with a 30-second phone call. "Why?" she whispered. "Because he is your brother." He stepped closer. "And because I told you that you are not to run. This does not make me yours," she said, her voice trembling with a new kind of fear, the fear of his control, of his power. "You do not own me, Luca." The air in the room crackled, his eyes turned dark. The brief moment of kindness was gone, replaced by the predator. "Do not," he said, his voice a low growl. "Say that again. It's true. You cannot buy me by saving my brother. You cannot order me to stay. I am not one of your men. I am not your property." She was backing up, hitting the wall. She was terrified of him, but she was more terrified of what she was becoming. He followed her, his rage a palpable force. "You think this is about owning you?" He slammed his hand against the wall, inches from her head. The impact shuddered through her bones. She flinched, a sharp, violent recoil. Squeezing her eyes shut, the sound of her gasp, the sight of her cowering, broke his anger instantly. He dropped his hand. He visibly fought for control, his chest heaving. The rage evaporated, replaced by a raw, desperate vulnerability that was far more dangerous. He looked at her, truly looked at her, at the terror in her eyes, the defiance in her jaw. "Elena," he whispered. He reached out, his hand shaking slightly, and rested it on the wall, near her shoulder. He leaned his forehead against his fist, his eyes closed. "You don't understand." He turned his head, his cheek resting on the wall, his gaze fixed on her. "I am not afraid I own you." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a raw, husky whisper. "I am terrified they will take you from me. If you leave, if you run, they will find you. The Mancinis, the man you fled from your past, they will use you to hurt me. And I will burn the entire city to the ground to get you back." He touched her. His fingers, still rough and calloused, traced the line of her jaw. "You don't understand what I do to keep you alive." She was trapped, not by his anger, but by his fear. He was not a monster. He was a man, terrified of the one weakness he had allowed himself. She did not pull away. He looked at her mouth, and she looked at his. It was the stairwell. It was the study. It was the rooftop. But this time, it was different. It was not anger. It was not confusion. It was a desperate, aching need. He kissed her. It was slow, almost agonizingly so. A deep, bruising kiss that tasted of whiskey and his iron control and the desperation he had just confessed. It was a kiss of surrender. She did not respond for a long moment. Then, with a small, broken sound, her hands came up. They did not push him away. Her fingers, shaking, fumbled with the top button of his dark shirt. She needed to feel his skin, to know the man who had just saved her brother and threatened to burn the world was real. She undid the first button, then the second. His skin was hot beneath her cold fingertips. He broke the kiss, pressing his mouth to the pulse point on her throat. He kissed the line of her collarbone, his breath hot against her skin. "Tell me to stop, Elena," he whispered, his voice low and husky, his lips moving against her. "Tell me to stop, and I will." He was giving her the power. He was giving her the choice. She looked at this dangerous, complicated, and broken man, the man who had shown her violence and then, in his own way, profound kindness. She did not tell him to stop. Instead, she slid her hands inside his shirt, her palms flat against the hard, warm wall of his chest. She gripped the fabric and pulled him closer. His control shattered. He kissed her again, a deep, possessive claiming. His hands slid from the wall to her waist, gripping her, pulling her flush against him. He lifted her easily, and she wrapped her legs around his hips, her back pressed against the wall. It was a frantic, desperate collision, a silent, unspoken confession. It was not gentle, and it was not soft. It was overwhelming, a raw, emotional wave that drowned them both in the small, dark room. The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of birds and the feeling of warmth. She was in his bed. This time, she was not on top of the covers. She was under them, tangled in the sheets and in his arms. He was asleep, his face turned toward her, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. One arm was draped protectively over her waist. It was quiet, peaceful, a stolen, impossible moment. She watched him, memorizing the line of his jaw, the scar on his eyebrow. He held her, even in sleep, as if he was afraid she would evaporate. She felt, for the first time since she was a child, completely safe. He stirred, his eyes opening slowly. He looked at her, his gaze clear and unguarded. There was no coldness, no distance. He just looked at her. He tightened his arm, pulling her closer, burying his face in her hair. He breathed her in, a long, slow inhalation. He held her like that, longer than he should have. As the sun climbed higher, flooding the room with light, a sharp, intrusive knock echoed through the suite. "Boss?" Vinny's voice, muffled by the door. "It's 8. The meeting with the suppliers is at 9. Luca froze. Every line of his body tensed. The peace shattered. He untangled himself from her, his movements economical and precise. He swung his legs out of bed, his back to her. The man who had held her was gone. The boss was back. "I'll be out in 10. Luca called, his voice the familiar, cold command. He stood, stretching, and walked to the closet, not looking at her. He pulled out a fresh suit. Elena sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. The warmth was already gone, and the room felt cold. "Get cleaned up," he said, his voice distant as he fastened his watch. "Send word to Mrs. Bianchi that you are sick. Stay in your quarters today." It was an order. A dismissal. He finished dressing, grabbed his jacket, and walked to the door. He did not look back. He did not say goodbye. He left, closing the door with a quiet, final click. Elena stared at the empty space where he had been. She was alone again, in his massive, empty bed, the sheets still holding his scent. The whiplash of his shift, from tender protector to cold employer, was brutal. She felt used, discarded, and utterly, hopelessly confused. The dismissal was a physical ache, a cold hollowness in her chest that rivaled the fear. Elena did as she was told. She stayed in her quarters, reporting herself sick. Mrs. Bianchi had looked at her with knowing, pitying eyes. Elena spent the next 2 days in that small, suffocating room, a prisoner of his protection, feeling the walls creep in. He had held her as if she were the world, and then discarded her as if she were a dirty secret. The coldness was a new, impenetrable armor. When she finally resumed her duties, he was a stranger. He did not look for her. His gaze when it did pass over her, was as empty and hard as polished stone. It was pushing her away, building a wall so high and so thick that no one could see the weakness she represented. She understood. On some level. He was trying to shield her, by pretending she meant nothing. He made her less of a target, but the logic of his world was brutal, and the reality of it felt like a betrayal. The whispers from his men, however, did not stop. Dante, in particular, watched her with an open, contemptuous hatred. He saw her as the root of the problem, the crack in the foundation. She found out how deep that hatred ran on a rainy Thursday afternoon. She was polishing the long mahogany table in the formal dining room, a room almost never used. The penthouse was quiet. Luca was gone, in a meeting downtown. Vinny was with him. She heard voices from the adjoining billiards room, Dante's, low and furious. "It's been a week," Dante was saying. "He's still distracted. The Mancini deal is falling apart because he's worried about the maid's feelings." "So what?" Another voice, younger, replied. "He's the boss. It's his business." "It's our business when it gets us killed." Dante snarled. The sharp crack of a pool ball followed. "He won't cut her loose. He ordered a hit, then brings her to his bed. He's compromised. He's weak." "What are you saying, Dante?" "I'm saying—" Dante's voice dropped, and Elena had to lean closer to the door, her heart a cold stone. "That distractions get removed. The next big linen delivery is Tuesday. The vendor truck uses the service alley. It's a perfect window. We hit the truck, make it look like a Mancini job. A kidnapping gone wrong. The girl disappears. Luca gets his head back in the game. It's a mercy." Elena's blood ran cold. A mercy. They were going to kill her. Tuesday. 4 days. She fled, her polishing rag clutched in her hand. She had to warn him. This was not a rumor. This was a plan. She waited by his study, her entire body vibrating with terror. He returned just after 6, his face a mask of exhaustion. He saw her waiting, and his eyes hardened. "Not now, Elena," he said, brushing past her. "No, you have to listen," she said, following him into the study. "Please, Luca, I heard them. It's Dante." He threw his keys onto the desk, the sound a sharp, metallic crash in the quiet room. He turned, his gaze dismissive. "I told you to stay out of business. You don't understand. He's going to kill me," she cried, the words tumbling out. "He said I'm a distraction. On Tuesday, with the linen truck, he's going to make it look like the Mancinis. Enough!" Luca roared. His voice hit her like a physical blow, and she stumbled back. He was not just dismissive, he was furious. "You are to go to your room," he said. That's his voice dropping to a low, lethal command. "You will not listen at doors. You will not come to me with fantasies. You will not speak of my men. Dante is a captain. You are a maid. Do you understand the difference?" The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was not protecting her. He was choosing them. He was choosing the business. Tears, hot and humiliated, stung her eyes. She had been a fool. That night in his arms had meant nothing. It was a momentary lapse. She was, and always had been, disposable. "I understand," she whispered, her voice dead. She turned and walked away. The rejection was the final, breaking blow. He would not protect her. The man who had saved her brother, the man who had held her, was the same man who was now feeding her to his wolves to maintain order. Hurt and scared, she made her decision. She was not going to wait for Tuesday. She was going to run. She had to get to Miguel. Luca's man had put him in a safe house, but how safe was it, really? If Luca's own house was this full of vipers, she had to get him, and they had to disappear. She grabbed the small bundle of cash from her suitcase. $840. She took the new, untraceable phone Luca's security had given her after the bug incident, the one he thought would keep her safe. She put it on her cot, under the pillow, a message. I will not be tracked. She knew the vendors. She knew the schedules. The next delivery was not linens. It was produce. Tonight. At 10. She slipped into the service hallway. She waited in a dark alcove by the loading bay. The produce vendor, a man she had often given coffee to, wheeled his empty metal carts toward the service elevator. She moved out of the shadows. "Carlos," she whispered. He jumped. "Elena, you scared me." "What are you doing down here?" "I need a favor," she said, pressing a $100 bill into his hand. "A big one. I need to get out of here. No questions. Just hide me in your truck. Get me to the bus station." He looked at the money, then at her terrified eyes. He nodded once. "Get in the cart. Stay low." She climbed into the large, cold metal cart. He covered her with empty burlap sacks. They smelled of onions and damp earth. She heard the rumble of the truck, the closing of the bay door. She was out. She did not see the black sedan parked across the street, the one that had been there for days. She did not see the man in the passenger seat make a phone call. "She's in the produce truck," the man said, "heading south." Dante was right. She's running. It was 2 a.m. when Mrs. Bianchi, unable to sleep, did a final check of the staff quarters. She saw the light under Elena's door. She knocked. "Elena?" Silence. She used her master key. The room was empty. The bed was made. On the cot, under the pillow. She found the phone. She ran to the study. Luca was there, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the phone on his desk, at a map of the city. He had been tracking her. And for the last 4 hours, the small, pulsing dot that was Elena had not moved from her room. "Mr. De Lorenzo." "Mrs." Bianchi panted, holding up the identical phone. "She's gone. She left this." Luca looked from the phone in his hand to the one in hers. The ruse, the decoy. It was very, very calm. He set his whiskey glass down. He looked at Vinny, who was standing by the window. "She's gone," Luca said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Boss? Find her. We're all ready." Luca swept his arm across the desk. The phone, the lamp, the glass, the computer monitor, everything crashed to the floor in a shower of glass and plastic. "I said find her!" he roared. A sound of pure, primal rage. He grabbed Vinny by the front of his suit, slamming him against the wall. "You were supposed to be watching. My men, my house, and she is gone." "Luca, calm down," Vinny gasped, his face pale. "She's out there." Luca breathed, his eyes wild. He let Vinny go, pacing the room like a caged tiger. "The Mancinis. Dante." He stopped. "Dante, get him." Vinny made the call. "He's not at his apartment, boss. His security says he went out, for a drive." Luca's face went white. He understood. It was not a kidnapping plot. It was an execution. And she had run right into it. Track her. Bus stations. Credit. She has no cards. He ran his hands through his hair, his terror finally breaking through the rage. The brother. Arizona. Yuma. That's where she's going. He grabbed his keys and the gun from his desk drawer. "Luca, wait!" Vinny shouted. "You can't go alone. Take a team." "A team?" Luca turned, his eyes flat and dead. "My team is compromised. I trust no one. If she dies, Vinny, I will burn this entire family to the ground, starting with Dante." He was gone. The drive from Brighton Heights to Yuma, Arizona, was 13 hours. He did it in 10, his Maserati a black streak on the highway, a desperate, solitary man driving into the sunrise. Elena arrived in Yuma after a grueling, terrifying 36-hour bus ride. She was exhausted, filthy, and running on pure adrenaline. She found the address Luca's man had sent her. It was a sun-bleached trailer in an RV park at the edge of the desert. She knocked, her heart hammering. The door creaked open. Miguel stood there, pale, thin, and shaking, his eyes wide with a combination of sickness and fear. "Lena?" he croaked. "Miguel." She threw her arms around him, pulling him close. He felt like a skeleton, a cold, damp sweat on his skin. "You're sick," she whispered, pulling him back inside the tiny, squalid trailer. "It's the Retiro." He coughed, a deep, rattling sound. "The men here, they give it to you, so you can't leave. I'm so sorry, Lena." "Shh. It's okay. I'm here." She looked around. "Where is the man who was protecting you?" He left this morning, said he had to check on something. He locked me in." She understood. Luca's man had been pulled away, likely to join the hunt for her. She was alone with her sick brother. "We have to go," she said, pulling him to his feet. "We have to go now." She had him halfway to the door when the first car pulled up, blocking the trailer's only exit. Then another, and another. They fanned out. 4 black sedans, their headlights cutting through the twilight dust. Men got out, hard men, not from Yuma. Dante stepped out of the lead car, his suit immaculate despite the dust. He looked at her, his expression one of mild disappointment. "I have to admit, Elena," he said, "you made this more difficult than it needed to be. Killing you in the alley would have been clean. This is a mess." "Dante," she breathed, pushing Miguel behind her. "It's me you want. Let him go. He's sick. He's not part of this." Dante laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You're right. You are what I want. The boss's weakness." He pulled a gun, his movements unhurried. "He'll be angry, but he'll get over it. He'll thank me. Eventually." He raised the gun, aiming it squarely at her chest. Elena closed her eyes. A deafening roar split the air. It was not a gunshot. It was the sound of a high-performance engine at full throttle. A black car, coated in dust, seemingly appearing from nowhere, slammed broadside into Dante's sedan. The impact was catastrophic, sending the car spinning, its metal screaming. Luca's Maserati, its front end crumpled, slid to a stop. He stepped out of the driver's side, a gun in each hand. He was not wearing a suit. He was in a black t-shirt and jeans, his face grim, his eyes fixed on Dante. Dante, recovering, fired. Luca didn't flinch. He fired back, twice, precise, controlled. Dante's man beside him dropped. "Elena, get to the warehouse, now!" Luca roared, gesturing to a large, rusted metal building behind the trailer park. He moved, using the cars as cover, firing with deadly accuracy. He was not a brawler, he was a soldier. He took a bullet in the shoulder, the impact spinning him, but he didn't go down. He grunted, switched his gun to his other hand, and kept firing. Elena grabbed Miguel and ran. Luca took down 2 more men, then another. He grabbed Elena, shoving her forward, shielding her with his own body as bullets sparked off the metal behind them. They reached the warehouse. He slammed the heavy, sliding door shut, plunging them into near-total darkness. The silence was deafening, broken only by their ragged breathing and the drip, drip, drip of something from the ceiling. "Are you hit?" he gasped, his back against the door. "No, you are," she said, her voice shaking. She could see the dark stain spreading across his shoulder. "It's fine." He was reloading his gun, his movements clumsy with his injured arm. "Let me see." She moved toward him. The darkness, the blood. It was just like the first night. He slumped against the wall, finally letting the adrenaline fade. He was bleeding, not just his shoulder, but a long, shallow graze along his ribs, where a bullet had torn through his shirt. He let her. He sat on an old oil drum as she tore at his t-shirt, her hands shaking. "Take it off," she ordered, her voice trembling. He pulled the ruined shirt over his head, wincing. She stared at him. The scars she had glimpsed, she now saw clearly. A long, puckered line on his abdomen, the unmistakable round scar of an old bullet hole near his collarbone, and now, the new bright red wounds. She ripped a long strip from the bottom of her own shirt, pressing it hard against his bleeding shoulder. He hissed, but didn't move. She was weeping, silent, hot tears of terror and a terrible, aching relief. "You're insane," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You came alone. You're hurt. They're still out there. They'll kill us all." She looked at his face, streaked with sweat and grime. "Why?" she sobbed. "Why would you come for me? I ran. I betrayed you. I'm a maid." He watched her, his gaze unwavering. He reached up with his good hand, grabbing her wrist, stopping her frantic work. He pulled her closer until her face was inches from his. He cupped her cheek, his palm rough and stained with his own blood. "Let me regret loving you," he murmured, his voice a raw, exhausted whisper. "But don't make me regret not saving you." The words struck her, a confession so raw it stole her breath. He pulled her face to his and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of desperation, of survival. It was raw, breathless, and tasted of gunpowder and blood. It was a final, fatal acknowledgement in the darkness. She kissed him back, her tears mixing with the grime on his face. When she finally pulled away, Her hands, stained with his blood, came up to his chest. She touched the new wound on his shoulder, her fingers tracing it. Then slowly, she moved to the old, puckered scar on his abdomen. She kissed it, softly. Then the bullet hole near his collarbone. She kissed that, too. A desperate, silent benediction for every scar that marked him. He closed his eyes, his hand tightening on her waist. Outside. They heard the sound of more cars, but this time, they were followed by the wail of sirens. Luca opened his eyes. Vinny, he breathed. He had trusted one man, and he had been right. Back in Brighton Heights, the cleanup was already in progress. Vinny's men, alerted by Luca's tracker, had arrived in Yuma to secure the scene, and back home. They had rounded up Dante's conspirators. The betrayal was laid bare. Dante had not just been removing a distraction. He had been feeding intel to the Mancini family for months, using Elena as the catalyst to start a war and stage a coup. He had bet on Luca's weakness, never once suspecting that his boss would tear across the country, alone, to save her. They returned to Brighton Heights in a private jet, a silent, tense flight. Luca's arm was in a black sling, his shoulder professionally stitched by a private doctor who met them on the tarmac. The graze on his ribs was tightly bandaged. He had not spoken, his face a mask of cold, calculating fury. Elena was no longer invisible. She was an object, a symbol. Vinny's men, who had met them at the airport, treated her with a new, terrified deference. She was not taken back to her small room in the staff quarters. She was escorted to a sprawling guest suite on the main floor, a room with its own balcony and a silken marble bathroom. It was a beautiful cage. For 2 days, the penthouse was a tomb. Luca was locked in his study with Vinny, the sound of his low, controlled voice, a constant, threatening hum. Elena stayed in her suite, staring at her hands. She kept seeing Dante's face. The moment he raised the gun, she kept feeling Luca's blood, warm and sticky, on her fingers. On the 3rd day, Luca called a meeting. The main lounge was filled. Every captain, every soldier, every man who had sworn loyalty to the De Lorenzo family was there. They stood, lining the walls, the air thick with tension and the metallic smell of fear. Dante was brought in last, held between 2 of Vinny's largest men. He was beaten, his face a swollen, purple mask, but his eyes were still defiant. He spat a wad of blood onto the white rug. Luca stood by the fireplace, his injured arm held stiffly at his side. He was immaculate in a black suit, his face pale and severe. Elena was brought to the room by a guard, who placed her in a chair near the doorway. She was not given a choice. She was there to be a witness. For 3 months, Luca began, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. We have been leaking. Our shipments, our routes, our safe houses. The Mancinis have been 1 step ahead every time. I thought I had a rat. I was right. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I was wrong, he continued. About why? I thought it was for money. He looked at Dante, his eyes flat and dead. But it was for power. He began to pace, slowly, in front of the fireplace. Dante here, a man who has eaten at my table for 20 years, decided my judgment was weak. He decided I was distracted. His gaze flickered, just once, to Elena. She felt the weight of every eye in the room land on her. She felt like she was burning. So he partnered with the Mancini family, Luca said. He fed them intel. He orchestrated the hit on Paolo to make it look like an external threat. He planned to start a war, let the Mancinis bleed us, and then, in the chaos, he would remove the distraction and take control. Dante laughed, a wet, choking sound. You are weak, Luca. You're going to burn this family for a servant. She's nothing, and you tore the world apart for her. You proved my point. Luca stopped pacing. He stood directly in front of Dante. You are right about one thing. I did tear the world apart for her, because she is mine. He looked at Vinny. Vinny placed a pistol on the bar, a heavy, black piece of steel. Luca walked to the bar, his good hand picking up the weapon. He checked the clip. He chambered a round. He did not rush. Every sound was magnified, the click of the slide, the brush of his suit jacket. He walked back to Dante. He pressed the muzzle of the gun under Dante's chin, forcing his head up. "You put your hands on what was mine," Luca whispered, his voice for Dante alone. "You tried to take her from me. You made a fatal mistake. You thought she was my weakness." He stepped back, his eyes sweeping the room, meeting the gaze of every man there. "She is not my weakness," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "She is my line," and he crossed it. He raised the gun and shot Dante in the head. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Elena screamed, a small, choked sound she swallowed immediately. Dante's body slumped, lifeless. The two soldiers let him fall to the rug. The room was in absolute, stunned silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Luca did not look at the body. He looked at his crew, his gaze a steel blade. "This family," he said, his voice hard, "was fractured by rumor, by weakness, by him." He nodded at the body. "The fracture is now sealed. Let me be clear, so no other man makes the same mistake." He walked over to Elena's chair. She was trembling, her hands gripping the armrests, her eyes wide with horror fixed on the body. Luca reached down. He put his good hand on her shoulder. His grip was firm, grounding. "This is Elena Rosario," he announced to the room. "She's not staff. She's not a distraction. She's under my protection. Any threat to her, any disrespect to her, is a threat to me. You will treat her as you treat me. Is that understood?" It was a declaration of war, a public claiming. He had not made her his girlfriend. He had not made her his wife. He had made her his, an extension of his own power. Vinny was the first to move. He nodded, his face grim. "Understood, boss." One by one, the other men in the room nodded. Understood. The reaction was immediate. A rift, silent but deep, tore through the crew. Some of the younger men looked at Elena with a new, terrified awe. The boss had crossed the country, alone, guns blazing for this woman. She was a legend. Others, the older, more traditional soldiers, looked at her with suspicion. She was a liability, a woman he had just publicly placed above the family, above the business. Luca had drawn his line in the sand, and he had dared anyone to cross it. No one did. Elena spent the next week in her cage. The guilt was a physical weight, a sickness that kept her awake. Dante was dead. Paolo was dead. The men in Yuma were dead. A war with the Mancinis was no longer a cold tension. It was a certainty. And she was the cause. She was the one who had fled. She was the one he had chased. She was the one he had killed for. She looked at her new, beautiful clothes. She looked at the plate of food a terrified staff member left outside her door. She was a ghost in a gilded cage, haunted by the blood that had been spilled to keep her there. Luca came to her on the 8th night. He found her standing by the window, a small, packed duffel bag on the bed. It contained the few items she had arrived with, and the gray uniform she had worn for 2 years. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice was not angry. It was thin, exhausted. She turned. "I cannot stay here. Luca, look at this." She gestured to the room, to the penthouse. "This is not my life. I am not this. Every time you look at me, you see the weakness Dante talked about. Every time your men look at me, they see the reason a war is coming. I have to go. I told them you are under my protection." "I don't want your protection," she cried, the words tearing from her throat. "Your protection is a cage. Your protection is a death sentence. Your protection got Dante killed. It got Paolo killed. I can't breathe here. Luca, I can't live with that." She grabbed the bag and walked to the door. "I am leaving. You can't stop me." He moved, blocking the door with his body. His face was pale, his eyes dark with a pain she had never seen before. Not anger, not passion, just a raw, devastating agony. "Please," he said. "Don't." She tried to push past him, but he caught her arm. "Elena, stop. Let me go," she wept. "I am not yours. I don't want to be. I just want to be free. I just want to go home, and I don't even have one." His composure broke. The boss, the killer, the king. He crumbled. His voice broke, a raw, desperate whisper. "Don't make me beg," he said. "Elena, please. I've never begged anyone. For anything." The words struck her silent. He was begging. This man, who had executed another in cold blood, was begging her to stay. She looked up at him, her tears freezing on her face. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hot, urgent, and desperate. It was the kiss of a man drowning, grabbing for his only lifeline, his good hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, his mouth slanting over hers. Hard. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated fear, the fear of losing her. He backed her against the wall, his uninjured shoulder pinning her. His other hand roamed her body, frantically, as if to memorize her, to make sure she was real. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her bag dropping to the floor. He pressed her against the wall, his breath coming in short, harsh gasps against her mouth. It was too much, too fast, a fire burning out of control. Then, just as suddenly as it began, he stopped. He pulled back, just inches, his forehead resting against hers. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. His hand came up, holding her face, his thumb stroking her tear-stained cheek. "If you stay," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "You become part of my world. You saw what I did to Dante. You saw Paolo. This is not a game. It's dangerous. It's ugly." He looked into her eyes, his gaze unflinching, showing her all the darkness he held. "But you'll never be alone again. You'll never be invisible. You'll never have to run. I will protect you, not as a possession, as my partner." He searched for the word. "As my equal." He set her down gently, but did not let her go. He just held her face, waiting. He had given her the truth. He had given her the choice. Elena looked at him, the man who had terrified her, the man who had saved her, the man who had begged. She saw the killer, and she saw the man who had sat in a chair all night just to watch her sleep. She knew, in that moment, that she had stopped running in that Yuma warehouse. "I will not be your weakness," she said, her voice quiet, but steady. "You are my strength." He breathed, relief flooding his features. "Then I will stay." She said it not for safety, not for the penthouse, not for the protection. She said it for him. He closed his eyes, his entire body slumping in relief. He kissed her, just once, a soft, sealing promise. The next day, she asked him about Miguel. "He's safe," Luca said. They were in his study, but this time, she was not standing like a servant. She was sitting in the leather chair opposite his desk. Vinny relocated him, a private medical facility in Colorado. The best doctors. They're helping him with his sickness. He's clean. He will be safe there. Indefinitely. Elena nodded, a weight she hadn't known she was still carrying lifting from her. The peace lasted exactly 2 days. On the third day, the phone rang. Luca answered. He listened, his face turning to granite. He hung up without a word. "What?" Elena asked. "The Mancini family has given its answer," he said. "A car bomb at the Northside warehouse. 3 of my men are dead. They just declared war." Luca's world snapped into motion. Men with guns appeared in the hallways. The penthouse became a fortress. Elena found Luca in his study that night. He was standing over a map of the city, Vinny and 2 other captains at his side. "Elena, not now," he said, not looking up. "I'm not leaving," she said. The men looked up. Luca turned to her, his brow furrowed. "I am not going to be the woman you hide," she said, her voice clear. "I am not going to be the weakness they try to exploit. You said I was part of your world, so I will be. What are you saying?" "Teach me," she said. "Teach me how to defend myself. I will not be the victim, Luca. I will not be the one you have to save. I will be the one who stands next to you." He stared at her, a long, searching look. He saw the steel in her eyes, the same steel he had seen on the rooftop. He nodded, slowly. "I won't," he said. "I can't, but she will." He made a call. The next morning, a woman arrived at the penthouse. She was tall, slender, with dark hair pulled back into a severe braid, and the coldest, palest blue eyes Elena had ever seen. She wore tactical pants and a simple black t-shirt. "Elena, this is Sophia," Luca said. "She handles sensitive security. She's the best. She will teach you." Sophia looked Elena up and down, her expression unreadable. "She's soft. She learns fast, Luca replied. Sofia nodded. In the gym, 6 a.m., tomorrow. Don't be late. Elena's training began. It was brutal. Sofia did not coddle her. She taught her how to hold a gun, how to strip it, how to fire it at the private range in the basement. She taught her how to break a hold, how to use a man's weight against him, how to kill with a knife or with her bare hands. Elena, the invisible maid who had flinched at loud noises, learned to fight. She learned to be as cold and as hard as the world she had chosen to stay in. The war was not cold. It was hot, bloody, and fought in the streets of Brighton Heights. The car bomb at the warehouse was the first shot, and the Mancini family followed it with 2 more hits on De Lorenzo suppliers. Luca retaliated with a brutal, calculated efficiency that stunned the city. He was not just defending his territory, he was a man avenging a personal attack. The penthouse became a fortress, a command center. Elena lived in the eye of the storm. Her days with Sofia were no longer training, they were drills. She learned to field strip Luca's preferred handgun in under 30 seconds. Her hands, once soft from lemon oil, now calloused and sure. The city was bleeding. The mayor, his reputation and his re-election in jeopardy, finally intervened. He called for a truce, forcing a meeting on neutral ground, a public display of peace. The annual Mayor's Charity Gala, held at the city's Grand Museum, was chosen as the venue. Both families would be required to attend. It was a ceasefire, enforced by the pretense of civilization. You are not going. Luca did not look up when he said it. He was in his study. A map of the museum's layout spread on his desk. Vinny and Sofia stood opposite him. Elena, who had entered without knocking, did not flinch. I am. He looked up. His eyes were hard. This is not a discussion. You are the one thing they will target. You will stay here in the safe room with 4 guards. That is final. No, she said. Her voice was quiet, but the steel in it was unmistakable. For 6 weeks, I have done everything you and Sofia have asked. I have learned to shoot. I have learned to fight. I have learned to see the threats. I will not be the woman you hide in a panic room. Luca. She stepped closer to the desk. You told them I was not your weakness. If you lock me away tonight, you prove Dante was right. You prove to the entire city that I am. Elena, this is not a drill, Vinny said, his voice pleading. It's a snake pit. I am aware, she said, her gaze fixed on Luca. I am not asking for your permission. I am telling you I will be at your side. Luca stared at her, seeing not the terrified maid he had found in his kitchen, but a woman who looked like a queen. Her training had not just hardened her, it had given her a dangerous, icy poise. He knew that look. It was the same one he saw in the mirror. She would not be moved. Sofia, Luca said, his voice flat, get her a dress, something appropriate. She already has one, Sofia said, a small, rare smile touching her lips. The dress was sleek, black, and simple. It fell from her shoulders in an unbroken line, pooling at her feet. It was elegant, severe, and, as Sofia had pointedly shown her, made of a heavy silk that would not impede her movement. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. She wore a single diamond necklace, a gift from Luca that had sat in its box for weeks. Tonight, she wore it as armor. When she walked out of her suite, Luca was waiting. He was in a black tuxedo, his healed shoulder moving stiffly, but his presence was a physical weight in the hallway. He stopped, his gaze sweeping over her. He said nothing. He simply offered his arm. The gala was a glittering lie. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden light over the museum's grand hall. A string quartet played in the corner. Men and women in expensive jewels and tailored suits laughed, holding champagne flutes, their eyes cold and watchful. The truce was fragile. The Mancinis were there, across the hall. Antonio Mancini, the old Don, sat in a chair, a blanket over his knees, his eyes as sharp and predatory as a hawk's. His son stood around him, a wall of resentment. Luca and Elena entered, and the room went silent. The music, the laughter, it all died for a single breathless moment. They saw Luca De Lorenzo, and they saw the woman he had torn the city apart for. She was not cowering, she was not hidden. She was on his arm, her head held high, her gaze sweeping the room with a calm, assessing stare that marked her as one of them. Luca's hand was at the small of her back. His touch was a declaration. Mine. They moved through the crowd. Luca spoke to the mayor, his voice a low, polite rumble. Elena stood beside him, a perfect, silent partner. She felt the stares, the whispers. She ignored them. She was watching hands. She was watching doorways. She was doing what Sophia had taught her. "They're unnerved," Luca murmured, his lips near her ear, as he guided her toward the terrace. "Good," she replied. It happened as they were passing the main bar. It was a moment of chaos, a cluster of guests moving at once. A waiter, young, with a face no one recognized, cut through the crowd. He was not one of Luca's men. He was not a Mancini. He was a third party, an ally, desperate to prove his loyalty to the old family. He moved with a sudden, serpentine speed. He was not aiming for Luca. He was aiming for her. Elena saw it, the flash of movement, the way his hand darted, not for a glass, but for the inside of his white jacket. She moved, twisting, bringing her hand up to block, just as Sophia had drilled into her. But Luca was faster. He moved without a thought. He shoved her, hard, sending her stumbling back into Vinny's arms. He turned, his body shielding the space where she had been. He didn't have time to draw his gun. The man lunged, the stiletto, thin and sharp, flashed under the chandelier light. Luca grunted, a sharp intake of breath, as the blade sank deep into his bicep, the same arm that had been shot in Yuma. Chaos erupted. Sophia was on the assassin in an instant, her movements a blur of lethal precision. A single shot, muffled by the crowd, and the man dropped, the stiletto still clutched in his hand. Screams, glass shattering. The string quartet stopped, the last note a screeching whine. "Get her out!" Luca roared, clutching his arm, blood already staining the white sleeve of his tuxedo. Vinny and Sophia formed a wall around them. Guns drawn, pushing through the panicking, screaming crowd. They were out the service door in 10 seconds, bundled into the armored sedan. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. Luca was breathing heavily, his head back against the seat, his face pale. Elena sat beside him, her hands pressed over the wound, her own black dress dark and sticky with his blood. She was not crying. She was cold. She was furious. When they entered the penthouse, the entire crew was already assembled, summoned by Vinny. They were in the main lounge, the same room where Dante had been executed. The men were armed, their faces grim, expecting a war. "Boss, you're hit," one of the captains said, stepping forward. "Get the kit," Elena ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. She did not wait for permission. She guided Luca to a chair. "Take off the jacket." He let her. The crew watched, stunned into silence, as this woman, who had once been their maid, gave orders. She cut the tuxedo shirt open with a pair of shears. The wound was deep, a vicious puncture, bleeding profusely. It was high on the arm, near the shoulder, just missing the old scar. "It's clean through," she said, her voice clinical. She packed the wound with gauze, her hands steady, her movements precise. She worked without fear, her focus absolute. Luca just watched her, his expression unreadable. "This is it, boss." A captain named Sal, one of Dante's old guard, said, his voice shaking with rage. "This is what we talked about. This is the proof. The Mancinis. They will not stop until they have her. They know she's your mark. You have to send her away. For the good of the family. End this." Elena's hands did not stop. She was wrapping the bandage, tight and clean. Luca looked at the captain. He looked at the faces of his men, at their fear, their doubt. He stood. The bandage, stark white against his skin, was already soaking through. Blood dripped onto the marble floor. He ignored the captain. He looked at Elena. She was finishing the knot, her brow furrowed in concentration. He put his good hand under her chin, tilting her face up. Then, in front of his entire crew, in front of the man who had just demanded her exile, he pulled her to him, his uninjured hand tangled in her hair, pulling her close. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the study. It was not the tender kiss of the rooftop. It was a brand. It was a statement. It was a hard, protective, unapologetic, claiming that silenced the entire room. He kissed her deeply, a public declaration of his choice, his allegiance, his love. He pulled back, just enough to rest his forehead against hers. His eyes were closed, then he opened them, and they were full of fire. He looked at Sal. "Let me regret loving you," he said, his voice soft, but it carried to every corner of the room. "But I won't hide it." He kept his arm around Elena's waist, pulling her to his side, a king presenting his queen. Sal looked at the floor. He said nothing. The challenge was over. No one spoke. No one moved. The execution of Dante had been a warning. This was a coronation. He had chosen. He had chosen her, over them, over tradition, over everything, and he had dared them to defy him. Not a single man did. The months that followed were bloody. But the war was short. Luca, with Elena at his side, was not just a boss. He was a crusader. He broke the Mancini family, shattered their alliances, and dismantled their empire with a ruthlessness that was terrifying. The Gala assassination, the breaking of the truce, had cost the Mancinis their reputation. Their allies abandoned them. By the time peace negotiations were settled, the De Lorenzo family was the undisputed power in Brighton Heights, and Elena was no longer a secret. She became a quiet, respected, and feared presence in the penthouse. She did not raise her voice. She did not give orders to the soldiers, but she sat at Luca's side during every meeting. She managed the family's legitimate businesses, her sharp, meticulous mind finding and sealing the cracks Dante's betrayal had created. The men who had once looked at her with resentment now looked at her with a profound, awed respect. She was not the boss's weakness. She was his counsel. She was the one who saw the details he missed. She was the one who could calm his rage with a single touch. The penthouse was finally quiet. The fear was gone, replaced by a stable, humming power. Elena stood on the rooftop, watching the city lights. It had been almost a year since she had stood here, shaking in the wind, a victim. Now, she stood in the calm, autumn air, a survivor. She heard the door open. She didn't have to turn. Luca came up behind her, his footsteps silent. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He was warm, solid. His arm, fully healed, bore another scar, a thin, white line that she sometimes traced when he was sleeping. "It's quiet," she said, leaning her head back against his shoulder. "For now," he replied. He rested his chin on her head, holding her. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time. "I've done many terrible things, Elena," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "So many. I've lost count. I've broken men. I've taken lives." He paused, his grip tightening. "But loving you," he whispered, "won't be one of them." Elena closed her eyes. She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his face. She looked at the scar on his eyebrow, at the hard line of his jaw, at the eyes that had once been so cold and were now, only for her, so warm. She kissed him, softly, a gentle kiss of peace, of promise. He held her, and they turned back to watch the glittering, indifferent lights of the city. They were not the same two people who had met in a blood-soaked study. They were scarred, changed, and bound, and for the first time in her life, Elena Rosario was not running. She was home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed the journey of Luca and Elena. We would love to hear from you, so please drop a comment and let us know where in the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of love and danger. What did you think of the story? Let us know your thoughts. We read every single comment.